Welcome to the final episode of our AGON series, everyone. This series, we sat down with the director of projects at Evil Hat Productions, Sean Nittner, to cover AGON. In today's episode, we get to finish discussing the process. As for the announcements after the show, it's only me today since Amelia is currently sick and working to feel better. So join me after the show for my final thoughts on this discussion series, our normal show closer stuff, a quick announcement about next month's series, and a call to action to help out one of the One Shot Network folks after their car got totaled in an accident a couple weeks ago. Thankfully, they are all fine, but now they don't have transportation for their little ones, and we will have more details after the show and a link in the show notes to the GoFundMe and other ways that you can help out. With all of that out of the way, enjoy the show, everybody. Last episode of Character Creation Cast, we began the discussion of this 4-part series with an unprecedented micro actual play showcasing the first leadership challenge in AGON before learning more about our guest, Sean Nittner. We're picking this conversation up right where we left off last time. Enjoy. Well, how do we think character creation in AGON stacks up to other systems that we've played and created characters for?
I think what AGON has going for it is that it's meant to be able to tell a full story in a short time period. You go through one island and you are not done with your journey, but you'll feel very accomplished. Like you could sit down in a 4-hour time slot, even a 2-hour time slot. I've done 2-hour games and tell the story of an island and feel like you've gotten a very satisfied thing. So I think that we want to be quick to the table. Honestly, the time that we spent making character creation, we really dove into all the details because we wanted to extrapolate on all these things. We were wanting to dig into the bits, but in play, it would be much faster than we did it. Mm-hmm. And so it's meant to get you to jump in very quickly. It's also meant to, give the GM at least a couple of those things, like who you have divine favor with, and those other little elements give you a few elements for the GM to hook onto. But fundamentally, we expect that you're going to be going to an island and dealing with the struggle there. So the GM isn't in a place where they have to build the adventure around you. They have 12 islands out of the book and ready to go. So I think the strengths come in that speed, in that those evocative name lists, in the fact that every option is a good option. Like there's no way where you're going to make a character you don't think, wow, this is a cool epic hero. What AGON doesn't do, that I think some of the games do and I really love, is develop really specific personal bonds between the characters. Like we have bonds, but we don't go into the backstory of why those are there. Give the GM loads and loads of potential adventure ideas based off of our character. Like there's a few, but it's not focused on giving a ton of those. Right. And it doesn't say what our characters value right off the bat. Like we know the virtues of acumen, courage, grace, and passion, but we haven't sort of set our disposition on those. Like you may just be like, I honor all the virtues. I honor just this one. I could care. Those don't matter to me. We find that out through play. And I think that it's really dependent. Some groups really like to really know who your characters are. They want to have like a fully fleshed out character before you hit the table. And other groups really like to be like, I kind of want to have a general idea and I'm going to develop it as I go. And that's AGON's spirit. Yeah. It's like, with a few words and a few choices, you've given us the broad strokes, and then in play, we're going to find out who you really are, like what really matters to you. You may have said like, I'm Iron-Minded Frutigan who's strong in blood and valor, but like when the first contest comes and you decide not to fight the harpies, but to understand why they're so angry, maybe we learn more about the Fred again, like only fought because that was the only option. And now that she's learned there's other options, maybe she doesn't want that to be her. So who knows? We'll find out. Or maybe she's like, no, war is all I know. To arms, right? And like those are things that I think AGON is really interested in finding out rather than determining early on. The other thing I think that's strong about AGON is that like you never roll to find out if you're cool. Some games, I think you kind of think you might play a character who can do a thing, and then you find out and play that you like the character you thought you designed to be able to like do a certain thing can't actually do it, and it's very frustrating. You're like, oh, I thought my character was a cool ass fighter, but every time I do it I get my butt kicked or whatnot. But I just said I had the spear of Poseidon. Like I didn't ask anybody for that permission. I was like, yeah, I got it. Does it mechanically benefit me? No. But does it mean I'm a big damn hero who stole a god's trident? Yes. So like you can just say like I am the queen of these far off lands. Like you just are. No one's ever going to question that. No one ever like says like, but roll for queenness, right? Like no, you're the queen. And I think that not rolling to figure out like how you suffer and struggle is much more interesting than rolling to figure out like if you are the person you thought you were. Certain games like Call of Cthulhu should do that. You're like, I'm this totally sane and stable person. Let's find out if that's true or not. But I think in this, AGON kind of sets you up to be like, oh, I can tell from my character sheet, I am already this accomplished hero. I'm the 20th level fighter, right? Starting the game, not the first level nobody, right? So.
Well, I mean, you already come in, just from that like very beginning description. It's like, I have an epithet, I have a name, I'm the scion of this thing. Like, I'm already great. I'm here to do more great stuff because I could use a few more chapters in my biography. Like,
exactly.
It's.
I don't want my story to
make sure
end
it
here.
sticks, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, just the character creation and especially that brief intro for the leadership, like that gave us some really interesting pictures of who these three characters are.
Yeah.
Like right off the bat. I mean, and leaning into the failures, leaning into the successes, and leaning into the being the best to kind of reel everything in, and then building off of each other's stories. It's really fascinating, like figuring out who these people are through that sort of play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm a fan. I mean, I'm biased, but I'm a fan.
Right. And that's okay. How do you feel like the process of character creation carries over into the game? Because character creation is always it's the first touch of a game that we have on top of, like we said, with seeing the character sheets. But it is the first time that you really start getting into it. So how do you feel like doing that process kind of sets you up for what's going to come when you sit down to play?
Yeah. I think one of my most frustrating experiences, and this has happened in lots of games, and it's not necessarily the game's fault, but I've seen it as a pattern, is people start making characters and they're so into it. They have all this agency. They get to describe their character and everything they've done, and they're riffing off each other like, oh, are we rivals? Oh no, are we ex-lovers? Do we grow up together? And like you just have an immense amount of agency as you're describing your character, and people get like so into it and they start building stories, sometimes even to the point of like playing before they play. That like you're like already starting to get into the game during character creation, and I tend to be like, let's say that for the game, let's hold it back. But people are like super animated, and it's this very much like group conversation. Everybody's talking, everybody's engaged. And then I find often games, as soon as the game switches to now we're playing it, the energy level just plummets. It's now suddenly one person, the GM, the Strife player, whoever, doing a lot of talking. Everybody else kind of waiting patiently for their turn, getting to jump in a little bit here and there. And then suddenly all those like, cool, I could do this and you could do this. And all those things, like, it's like they never happened. And now we're just like.
And then you fail your roll, nothing happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I swing and I miss. Oh, okay. I guess I sit here and wait for the next person to describe. And so I think that so many games they lose the energy between character creation and the first session, even if it's happening simultaneously, even if it's not like, oh, we're getting back together again. It's like we do it and immediately like, let's take a little bio break, and you come back and everyone's like, well, I kind of, I don't know. I feel like I had all the fun I was going to have, and like you haven't even started play, right? So I think it's really important to very quickly get back to the point where everybody is sort of engaging and everyone is doing things. And the leadership role is a quick way to do it, because I just give you a challenge. I don't need to think of where it came from. I literally just said a storm comes out of nowhere. Like it was total. I could have said everyone's starving because there's no fish and you need to go catch a big fish under the sea. I could have said like the boat's got a leak. It doesn't matter what it was. It wasn't based on the consequences of your past actions. I just need to throw you a challenge. And the important part of that is that I then give you the space to jump in and start reacting to it. And we see who you are and the characters are engaged again, and we're seeing them doing cool shit. And when we get on the island, when we actually arrive, there's a lot more. The players, I say what the situation is, and the players will talk amongst themselves. They don't have to spring right into the roles. They don't have to spring right into action. They'll talk amongst themselves, decide what they want to do, and we'll get a better sense of them. But I think the sooner you can get players from that high engagement, high agency space of character creation back to high engagement, high agency in play, the better. Because if there is a big dip, it's just like, oh, now it's the exposition part where we're listening to the GM talk for a long time. Or now it's the turn-by-turn part where one person gets to do a cool thing and the other 4 or 5 people are just kind of waiting. And good players will be engaged, will be asking questions, will be paying attention. But even then, if it's 30 or 40 or 50 minutes before you get to do anything in the game, that's a real bummer. And so I want to get everybody in like in the first 5-10 minutes, right? Like everybody is active and engaged.
I think the leadership role does a really good job of that, not only because it gets you right into the, like, it throws you right into the, like, in media res, here we are, let's go. But also because of the way that it works, it doesn't stop that, like, constant back and forth. Like, we all had, despite our roles, we all had a chance to say together, what is happening here? So like, because you're right, like a lot of games where you go from, it's like, we're all back and forth, we're great, like my thing works with your thing, that's so cool. And then it's like, well, now we're focused on one character and that's it. And now everybody else has to wait. And, like, whereas this was like, we got to build off of each other as we went, but we all had something to say about this is what the situation is.
Yeah. And as you can see, even my character rolling a failure was still super interesting. Like to me, I was just as excited. In fact, I was delighted to fail that roll. I was like, perfect. Absolutely. We're at sea. Of course I failed the roll. Right. I'm the best sailor that there is, but it doesn't matter when the gods directly say like, how about lightning bolts, And I cheated a little bit because I knew I was going to take us to Cryos where someone had stolen the Pillar of Storm. So I was like, I can throw this in, but it doesn't matter. I could have done that. Anybody could have narrated their failure as dramatically as they like. And so you still get to be cool, even when you're we're suffering rather than failing.
Yeah.
It really does mirror that whole like collaborative, like character creation, world building sort of feel of everybody trying to build on everybody else as you're going. It's a lot of yes ending into like, you go from the lowest point, any failures, and you're working your way up to like the most successful character's role. And so naturally it's going to build from like a troubling situation occurs to like success to bigger success to we beat it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting.
And interesting happens, usually the hero players, statistically speaking, the hero players will win most challenges, but not all. And so if all it is a description of suffering, then as the strife player then is like, cool, now I get the chart. Now I get to describe how the situation gets worse. Like you've all described how you failed to do this thing and why it's meaningful to you, but I, as strife player, I was best. So I'm going to describe how this thing goes wrong. And you have a lot of license in this game to be like, you're all trapped in cage. You're sent that you're all, I've literally just been like, you're all dead in Shades and Hades. Like, I've just been like, it's fine. You're Greek heroes. You'll find a way out. Like, it's not like
now what?
There's like not too much that the strife player can do. And the more you make it personal and the more you make it really high stakes, the more like they're like, well, we gotta fight this. And so it doesn't happen often, but when the best player is the strife player, they could really, really complicate the situation. And the heroes don't always have to prevail. In the end, there'll be a big battle and the heroes may not win that battle and they're going to leave the island no matter what. And they may leave it in ruins. I mean, most of the time they're pretty damn big heroes and they're gonna do better. But like, it's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee. Yeah. There's only one roll for every situation. You're never re-rolling. You only make one roll for each conflict, and the dice always stand as they are. So there's a lot of big ups, but there's also some big downs, and I feel like that back and forth creates a sense of like we're not just traipsing through this like without challenge, right? You did use the divine favor of the gods to help you in this thing. That is something that runs out, right? Like there are
you
times
can get to a point where you're like, I don't have any divine favor left. Like
right, absolutely. And you could still try these challenges. You can still support one another. You can still do things, but it does allow for some pretty big swings, and it allows for really high stakes in ways that I think don't deprotagonize the players, which is really, really important. I remember one time a player of mine was like, the giant like hits me with his club and sends me out into the sea and I'm lost forever at the ocean. And of course they just swam up on the shore the next time it was important. But like, as far as we all knew, it was like, oh no, we've lost this great hero, you know? So yeah, we get lots of big moments.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. What do you, as one of the designers of this game, feel is the biggest flaw of character creation in this game? And what is one of your favorite parts?
I think that I don't know that I would characterize this as a flaw per se, but I do think that there are people who really want to know, how do we know each other? What's our backstory? And we went through many iterations of it. And in the end, we decided, let's find that out more in play. But I do think for some folks, it really leaves them like, wait, why are we together? You know, like there isn't this, and I try to reiterate the, like, you're lost at sea, right? You know, the situation compels you to be together. But I think sometimes people really want the backstory, and this game doesn't offer it. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I do know for some players, the lack of a backstory, the lack of the specific reason for your bonds, makes it a little harder to jump in. Like we're asking you to kind of take a little bit of leap of faith. We're asking you to be like, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. It's there. Okay if you don't know. You can retcon it. We'll get there because we want to jump into play quickly. So I think that, you know, if your personal fun is I love to sit and make characters all on my own and think of characters, like AGON is really not the game for you. AGON is meant to be made characters at the table, really fast, really furious, and let's riff off of one another and let's introduce ourselves and then jump into play very quickly. So I don't think it offers that like, I'm going to spend 6 hours optimizing my character, right? There's not a lot of real min-maxing you can do. There's not a huge number of choices. Writing a 5-page backstory doesn't serve the game particularly well. And so I know some people that's really their jam. So
it's interesting because it feels like having that lack of detail baked into the character creation system is kind of metaphorical to the whole lost at sea in a fog. And like, who knows what your path is going to be getting home.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and the whole point is like to be remembered as this hero and like build up this story about yourself too. So like, it's like the story about yourself is what's happening right now. Like, so it makes sense that you don't have one yet because that's what you're doing. Right now.
We really want to know what kind of heroes, not what kind of heroes you are, what kind of heroes will you become? Like that's what we really care about. And though we say you're well known and you know you're that's true. Simultaneously, the most important adventures you have are the ones to come. We don't want to dwell on the war or sure, we can flash back to that, but the important things are what we all do together, not the things like, I kind of hate it when somebody's like not invested at all in the game because they really just care about their character's personal story and it's not having anything to do with the game. Like everything we really, really care about is happening at the table together.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is your favorite part?
Yeah. You took 13 iterations to get here. So like what are you like, this is it?
Oh, I mean, it's the name. Like, the name is the best part of this game. Like, people just saying like Lionhearted Kythia, sign of Poseidon, will engage in this contest over and over and over again. It's the developing of that ritual that like makes it feel like a Greek epic, right? Like that's how characters are introduced in the story, in the stories. Like we feel like we're embodying these. And when you hack it to other games, when you're like, Dominic Toretto driving the American muscle car, full of fast, full of fury, right? Like you can just see that's how I would describe him pulling into the race, right? Like, Brian driving his GT Cruiser, right? Like, with that's all customized and tricked out, with the spoilers in the back, right? Right. Like that's how I introduced my character in the story. And so it gives you that epicness, but it's also serving the mechanic. I'm not just saying this for no reason. I'm saying because I'm picking up dice that I'm going to roll to see how I do. So the most important parts of the character are the thing that makes the game run. And that's what I love. I'm not, again, the paladin who just I guess I'm a paladin, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just swinging my sword at these damn rats, right? Like, no, I'm going to constantly say, I, Lothlorien, paladin of Tyr, sent from the Isles of Mist, are here to clean out your rat infestation, right?
Yes.
Well, I
think that's a common theme in not just in like Greek epics, but in lots of stories. I mean, you have that in Lord of the Rings with Aragorn. Like he has like this full long title,
Yes.
There's another sci-fi series I read recently that like people getting epithets. It's like they did like, things during wars of conquest. Sure. And then you got and then it's something that's like shines like the edge shine of a knife, or they're crazy, like important things that tell the history of that character. And so I think it's a common trope too. And it feels really cool every time they get to use those full, it's like, I'm here now. Here's the full name. It's like when your parents call you your first and your middle name and you're like, now it's serious.
Ooh, I'm in trouble.
That's how you know it's business time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love it. I love just saying it over and over again. I try to model it so people don't, because a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm in. And I'm like, who are you? I'll be like, who are you? Who are you to change the challenge? Like my character,
No, if you don't say it, you don't get the dice. So.
Yeah, I'm like Isadora. Like Isadora who? Isadora, clear, graceful hearted.
we're only rolling 1d6 today, Ryan.
Yeah, I will kind of goad players a little bit to be like, who are you again? Remind me of your name, so it can be shouted out amongst the heavens. Like I'm always like, I want to hear your names, and I think that ritual, because we don't have a ton of die rolls. There's maybe going to be a handful of conflicts. Then you get to the battle, and then you're done. It's each one is important. Each one is really notable. So, So that. If we're talking specifically character creation, that's my favorite part for sure.
Absolutely.
I wanted to bring up two things that you'd kind of talked about in our very first episode of all of this, because I made little notes to remind myself later. But one of the things that you talked about first was describing things before you roll them rather than waiting until after you roll to see what happens. And I'm curious. I think I know why, but I'm curious your thoughts on like why you want people to do it that way, and why that was important enough to bring up in our discussion.
This is something we went back and forth on. It's probably the hardest learning curve for people to wait for the descriptions until after. And there's two reasons why we did it. One was a measure of time. So often it'd be like, I run up and I grab the ropes and I call out to the sailors and I do all this stuff. And then you're like, I do all these things. And then we roll the dice, and then you're like kind of often repeating yourself. You're like, I did that thing, and that's what rights the ship, right? So one, it was just like, well, we often end up saying the same thing kind of twice. Right. And so it's like, well, just wait and you'll say it all once you know the results, because now you know whether it's successful or not. And so you could describe whether you succeed or not, whatnot. The other thing is that sometimes the dice rolls sort of indicate, sometimes people narrate too far and the dice rolls kind of indicate, well, no, you didn't do that. You're like, I knock the Zakira, the pirate, off of the ship and I take this Pillar of Storms for myself. And you're like, oh, wah, wah. And I failed that roll.
No, because
like,
3 other people did better than me.
Yeah. Now you're like, I have to backtrack that. And like, I have to like explain how it made sense. And sometimes we get to like players kind of like different times and places where you're like, I'm talking to the prince. And you're like, I'm sneaking into the chamber. You're like, wait, at the same time, hold on, who's doing what? Like people can often kind of just narrate themselves going off in all these different directions. And we're like, no, this is the contest. It's, will the prince let you see the body of the fallen king that you know something happened to before the king is interned, right? That's the contest, right? You're strangers here. But it is customary. He's defying the normal rules of Apollo, but he's saying I'm the prince. So, you know, what I say goes. Can you win this contest of arts and narration to see the body, right? So I really hate when games get to the point where everybody's like, wait, what's going on right now? I thought we were doing this thing, but now you're describing something else. And so by waiting to narrate, we always say, how are we narrating in that contest? So it focuses us, it prevents us from having to retcon and like rewind things that don't actually happen. And it prevents redundancy of like saying, I do the thing, and then saying, I did the thing.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting because you're not using like skills the way a lot of games do. So like part of that, you know, narrating ahead of time is, you know, you having to be like, well, I'm going to like take out my sword and swing. And that's how I'm explaining to you like what I'm even going to roll. Whereas like in this game, it's like you're rolling your name and the domain and the, you know, so it's like none of that really identifies like what I'm actually doing in this situation. Because like, you know, I made that list of things. You know, I said, you know, my name and calling on Hera and blood and valor, but nowhere in there did I say, I'm going to swing my sword or I'm going to tell people that they're about to die. Like, you know, none of that had any impact on what I was rolling. I could have used my sword in there with that roll that I made. You could. But like that wasn't a thing that I had to justify in order to be able to roll that.
Right. And it's one of the, like, we've really tried to shift the player and GM responsibility a little bit. So the Strife player has a lot of tools. They've got the islands already there. They're meant to just ask what the players do, judge how the outcomes should happen, and respond to them. Like we try to give the Strife player a minimal amount of responsibility with regards to GM. And consequently, we also try to give the hero players greater responsibility. Like it's on you to describe how your epithet comes into play. No one's going to tell you it didn't work, but like if you don't do it, we're going to be like, how did being iron-minded affect this? And if you don't do it once or twice, like no one's going to like, you know, no one's going to ask you about it. But sometimes like we might be like, wait, you know, you rolling your epithet die, like how does that apply? Like we want to know, not because we want to challenge it, because we want to see it in your character. We want to see your character come more alive by bringing in that epithet. That's what distinguishes us, right? Like we might both be doing a challenge of resolve and spirit, but we do it in totally different ways. And we want to see those different approaches as a reflection of the characters.
The other thing that I wanted to ask about is that you mentioned when we talked about what kind of dice we use, you mentioned not using D20s because they're too swingy, which I agree with. I'm curious how you came to that decision because you use like, you know, 4s and 6s and 8s and 12s. Like, was there a time when you did try using a D20 in there and you were like, this didn't work? Were you just like, that's too high a number? Like,
no, that was actually inherited from first edition. First edition used D4 through D12. And so we already had sort of a framework. The contest mechanics didn't work the same, but you did have traits in different die sizes and they would go up and down. And there was a lot more kind of like your traits values would decrease as you use them and you had to refresh them. And there was lots of fiddliness to it that we don't have now, but we already had a pretty good, framework for like where the die rolls should sort of center. And then we used Any Dice, which is a tool for it's a tool that tells you average outcomes, medium outcomes, standard deviations of outcomes. And so we ran through like thousands and thousands of like, well, Any Dice did thousands. We ran through all these different calculations, like what are probabilities, what are the standard deviations. And so we already were pretty solid on like D12 being our cap. But for instance, Divine Favor working as a D4 that got added, that was a particular iteration where we're like, we want divine favor to be that little like cherry on top, that little extra bit, that little like with the benefit of the gods, I can go above myself. And so we did lots and lots of any dice calculations to figure out like what the strife level should be, what the hero level, what the heroes should be rolling. And so there was tons of statistical analysis that went into like figuring out how, like, should you start with all D6s and 1D, like right now you start with D6s and everything and a D8 and 1 domain. And like that, like where you start, how you advance, how much you advance, all those things we did tons and tons of statistical analysis on to make sure like it always feels challenging to some degree, but like you definitely see your character growth. And then also just lots of dice hitting the table, like playing it until we felt really good about it. But yeah, D20 never really entered into our thoughts. It was never really a consideration.
That stuff always just fascinates me. Like, I'm not good at math. I've never been good at math. Statistics is always like the only part of math that my brain's like, yeah, that makes sense, which is why I have a degree in political science. But it's always interesting to me when I get to talk to people and be like, why did you decide to use those dice? You know, like I recently read a game that was like, because I think D12s are the funniest kind of dice and I wanted to make a game to see how many of them you could roll. Like, you know, it's like, what was the thought behind it? You know, because some people are really like, they're like, I ran these analyses so that I knew I wanted somewhere like this level of swinginess. And, you know, like I mentioned before, like my favorite game being Legend of the Five Rings. And if you play the fourth edition, it's exploding D10s. So everything is very swingy. You know,
I've played a lot of L5R. I played like a 3-year campaign of it. Got through 3 characters. Lots of death in that campaign. And
and then you have something, you know, like Powered by the Apocalypse, where it's 2d6. You know, like it's a very limited amount of swing, and so it's always fun to me to be like, why did you make that choice? Like, why was that important?
Initially, the Strife player rolled very similar to the hero player, and it was like, you know, roll die, pick the dice too. But what we found is that with basic challenges, you know, if the Strife player rolls snake eyes, you're like, the challenge is a 2. You can't roll lower than a 2. You could not possibly roll lower than 2. This is the most boring. Why are we having this challenge at all? So we're like, the Strife player needs a baseline that can't go below. Otherwise, like, it's just not going to be fun. It's not going to be a challenge if I roll really poorly. And similarly, if I roll really high, kind of out of the blue, I'm like, I'm going to call this challenge a 2d8, which doesn't even seem that high. And I roll 16, and you're like, a 16? Holy
crap!
Oof, that's really hard for us to get on 2 dice when all we have is 1d8. Like, how do we even do that? I guess with divine favor and all this stuff. So a Strife player keeping 2 dice like the heroes does really it created a swinginess that was like, too many times you're like, this challenge is superfluous. We shouldn't even have to roll for it, versus this challenge is unbeatable. It seems like it's impossible for us to beat it. And so that's where a lot of that, like, so much that we couldn't get through dice averages. We had to get that through play. And we realized this is where it's fun.
This is the window of fun right here.
And in fact, James Mendez Hodes, who is designing right now the Greenbone Saga RPG, which is using the Paragon system. Greenbone Saga is a fiction series by Fonda Lee, and it's a phenomenal game that he's using the Paragon system. He even felt like the dice were too swingy on the player's side. And so in Greenbone, you have these various factions. You're part of a clan, you're aligned with these factions, and they give you in place of your lineage, in place of having like a die, because I'm part of the One Mountain clan, you do have a die. You got, you know, your D6 with them, but then One Mountain also has these various assets, and those assets allow you to be like, I have a bunch of fists who can come help me. Instead of rolling that D6, I just set it to a 5. And now I know that no matter what, I'll have 1 die that rolled at least a 5. And I'm going to roll the rest of my dice so you can lock a die in. When you do that, you have to call upon the faction and like give them some of your glory. So when you get the glory, you can't keep it all yourself. You have to give it to them. And then they advance as well. So like you're advancing, but your faction is advancing, which normally would seem like a great thing, except for sometimes you're going against your faction. Sometimes you're like, I need to sneak this away without the One Mountain clan noticing, and you're like, suddenly my faction die is being rolled against me, and I've done all this work to elevate it. I just made it harder. I'm hurting myself. So the fixed roll was Mendez looking at it going like, I really want the players to be able to have something they can just rely on as like like today I rolled 4 dice and I got nothing higher than a 2.
Right.
I was like, it's rare, but it happens. And in this case, I was all about it. But sometimes you might be like, oh man, if I had a fixed 5, I would have had at least a 7 and I would have won the contest. I wouldn't have been best, but I would have still prevailed. Right. And I could have done that in Mendez's game. So I like the swinginess and hang on. It doesn't bother me. I consider it a feature, not a bug. But there's different takes on it, and that's cool.
Again, like it's where is the fun in this game? Like, what is it that I want it to do? I mean, like there are games where it's like the goal is like it is really hard. It's like you very often will fail rolls because it's supposed to be like a difficult, treacherous, kind of thing, and it's like that's where the fun is in your game. Awesome. But if this game is about being a hero and making a name for yourself and all that kind of stuff, you don't want to be losing your die rolls all the time, Yeah. So I think it works really well for this game.
Absolutely.
I think you've managed to find that sweet spot with the Strife player, because that's a tough it's a tough balance,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's lots of field testing to come to it.
Absolutely. So are we skipping the fanfic section? I know we did the leadership roles.
Yeah, I feel like we did it.
Yeah. There we go. I guess then we can go into our last segment, our advancement discussion, and take it up a level.
Cool.
Take it up a level. Take it up a level.
So in this segment, we like to talk about character advancement and character growth in the game. We've touched on it and hinted at it kind of a little bit, but can you tell us how specifically advancement works in this game mechanically?
Sure. So characters advance in 3 ways. One of them is, as we've talked about a lot, is that as you go through contests and you gain glory, once you accumulate enough glory, your name die goes up, and that your name die is rolled in literally every roll you do. So it's very important. It's the most notable die, and it's also determines your final story at the end. So by winning contests or gaining glory in various ways, your name die advances. The other way that you advance is as you depart from the islands. You gain boons from the gods as you sort of appease them and do their will, and so the gods will give you advances as you naturally progress by resolving the trials that are on the islands. And then the third way that you advance and those kind of advances look like raising your you can see over on the right hand side of the lower right of the character sheet, they say boons. So they look like raising a domain die from a D6 to a D8, raising it from a D8 to a D10, just once though. Adding another epithet. Adding another epithet is pretty fun because then you can like bring in 2 epithet dice and you can explain like how you're both, graceful hearted and I don't know, a war leader, how you reconcile those 2 things.
I just love the vibe of your name getting longer and longer as you play too.
Yeah.
Like it just feels cool.
Mechanically, it is perfectly fine. It's not a huge advantage, but it is narratively extremely fun. And so those boons are gained that way. You also gain those boons when as your fate progresses. So as your character gets closer and closer to death, they also, or not death per se, but closer and closer to the end of their story, they also get more and more powerful. And so there is a logic to saying, I want to try and burn my character out as fast as possible so I can get as powerful as I can as early as possible. So I'll win as many roles and get as much glory as possible. Like that mindset is certainly a viable one, but it also means you're constantly putting your character, throwing them into the feet of agony. Like you're constantly like running them under the bus. And like, I find a lot of people who play these games like love to tell kind of emo tragic stories. And so this is giving us space for your character to really suffer. It doesn't have to be getting hit by a giant's club. It can be falling to the ground and weeping. It can be remembering a lost ally. It can be humiliation. We very distinctly, pathos is very much suffering in whatever form it means to you, and we think that we like the version of these characters that grow out of that suffering. So that's the 3 ways that you advance individually.
Just slowly realizing you killed all those people on that boat and you probably didn't need to, and you could have.
Yeah, you could have maybe saved them if you weren't so obsessed with proving
valor
yourself.
and blood and
Then so that's how the characters advance individually, and then the group as a whole advances by filling up the Vault of Heaven. And as you fill up the Vault of Heaven, that's when you gain the boons of the gods. Not only do you get god bonds on your character sheets, so you get now you have Hera will intercede on your behalf, right? You get a personal connection, a bond with the gods that you can use later on. But also that's eventually the way that you make it home. Mm-hmm. And so, depending on the length of your campaign, you say how many of the stars need to be revealed. And then if you fill up all the stars, you return home. And then we give your character their final name, where we look at your virtues and we give them one last part of their name. And we find out how long they'll be remembered based on their glory. So the group as a whole is progressing in the positive side by revealing the Vault of Heaven, and in the negative side by earning wrath of the gods. And so you're also while you're getting home, you're also pissing off the gods. The gods can both help and hinder you. They can be like, yeah, I like you, but you guys stole my idol, so I'm still going to punish you. And so you're while the wrath doesn't ever take away from you, it does add to challenges. But of course, adding to challenges just means the Strife player has bigger dice, which just means the difficulties are higher, which just means you gain more glory. So it is a fruitful circle that the more challenging something is, the more glorious you'll become when you overcome it. So we kind of look at it as all to the good.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how advancement works in the game.
Very cool. I like that a lot. Well, Sean, thank you so much for joining us to talk about AGON and to create characters with us. This was phenomenal learning about this game.
It was a blast.
I'm so glad. It was a total blast. I had a lot of fun, and we made really cool characters. And I love that we did a leadership role and saw how they played out. It was delightful.
Yeah, with that role it went so
Absolutely.
perfectly. I could not have hoped for a better outcome for all of that.
Yep, that outcome was exactly what I wanted to see.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
Absolutely. Can you go ahead and remind everyone where they can find you online or lack thereof, and what sort of things you're working on?
Sure. You can find me through Evil Hat at evilhat.com. If you want to have any questions about that, you can email feedback@evilhat.com, and I'm one of the people who sees those responses. You can also go to our project status page, which is linked on the homepage, to see what we're working on right now. You can also find out what I'm doing by going to bigbadcon.com and seeing we're just about to start our crowdfunding effort for this year. Big Bad will be October 24th to the 27th in the San Francisco Regency next to SFO Airport. It's a great small indie con where games like AGON are run aplenty. Lots of beautiful, wonderful people there running games, speaking on panels, running workshops, doing other kinds of cool events. So I'm very stoked about that. You can email me directly, SeanNittner@gmail.com. And things I'm working on. Oof, boy, do you have a fourth segment you want to?
Yeah.
You want to?
Could throw another section in here, just
yeah, sure.
See the show notes.
Yeah.
The other sections were a little shorter because this game is so fast. Currently, the big thing I'm working on is the Tomb Raider Shadows of Truth role-playing game. We got that licensed through Crystal Dynamics, and I am I'm a contributor on the project. I'm also the project manager. We have over 20 people working on that project right now. It's being led by Raid Najati, and it's just a beast. We're trying to produce it in a very quick amount of time, which is still 3 years, but 3 years from start to finish rather than 3 years from game completion to finish, which is a pretty big gap. And it's an open playtest right now. You can go to the Evil Hat site and sign up to playtest if you'd like. We're very excited to see what people make of it. Deathmatch Island, which is also a Paragon game, came from AGON by Tim Dene. Deathmatch Island is being shipped out to backers as we speak, and it will be available May 20th. It is a game where you arrive on an island sort of vaguely unsure how you got there, and you play deadly games. It's Battle Royale, it's Squid Games, it's Hunger Games, but it's also like weird shit's happening. So there's like X-Files, Lost vibes to it as well. Your characters randomly have a uniform, randomly have various things. It is a very delightful, but also like weird, insidious game. We're crowdfunding Stewpot right now as we speak. Depending on when this podcast drops, maybe it will have already been done. But Stewpot is Takuma Okada's tavern simulator game where you set down the sword and pick up the ladle. You retire as adventurers and become and run a tavern, and you play all these little mini games. It's based on Firebrand's framework, so each game is bespoke. Each game has its own custom mechanics to resolve it. Some of them are draw from a deck of cards, some of them are roll a die, some of them are flip a coin, some of them are just pick things from a list. Each game is resolved specifically to address that one particular little scene, and you take turns calling out scenes and watching how your tavern grows. And I think the part that is most lovely to me is that you literally start the game with all of these adventuring experiences. You're like, I'm a wizard and I can cast fireball and teleport and I have secret arcane knowledge. And over time you give those up and you're like, I traded my secret arcane knowledge for an amazing soup recipe, right? Like you turn in your adventure experiences for town experiences. And it's all about, you always will have had that arcane knowledge. You always will have been able to cast fireball, but that's now your past. Now it's about the things in the town and the people and what you've done there. So I love it. It's adorable. Honestly, I have another 12 or 13 games in the hopper, and I feel like it would be a crime against your listeners to list them all. But if you go to the project status page on Evil Hat, you'll see a lot of them. Dagger Isle supplement for Blaze in the Dark is coming out. Chen Jiang, Chinese Diaspora in Space, Tales from the Immortal Godship. Umdar, a giant fate game. New Monster of the Week material is coming out. So just lots and lots of things coming out. And with Big Bad Con, we'll be crowdfunding it May 14th, I think, is when we start. And so if you want to come, that's a great way to get a badge. But also, if you want to contribute to the con and help us cover all our costs, we're a nonprofit. There's everybody who runs it is entirely volunteer led. So this allows us the crowdfunding really allows us to focus the game, to focus the con on the attendees rather than on like huge expo halls and things like that. We're all there just to play a lot of fun games and to celebrate each other. So there's lots of pledge levels that are above and beyond just getting a badge, where you can have your name, you can have a game room dedicated in your honor, and then also doing that help us fund the whole event. So lots of good options will be appearing there.
Very cool.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much again for sitting down with us, and then thank you to everyone for tuning in.
It was a delight. Thank you too.
Call to action.
Yeah, like that.
All right. This one was a very interesting one. We didn't get to our traditional fan fiction in this series, which I was hoping for a little bit more thought processes to dive into, like where we could see these characters going. But like, this game is all about the mystery and the journey, right? And it feels like you have to kind of experience it in play to actually fully understand where things could actually go for the people that you create here, which is really interesting. Sean was fantastic. It was brilliant that we were able to actually walk through the first kind of leader selection scenario in the previous episode, like right after we introduce our characters again. But like, I was thrilled to cover this game. It's been on our list ever since we first heard about it, and we're really glad we were able to get this to fruition. But before we let you go for the day, we do have some calls to action. One Shot Network editor and behind the scenes extraordinaire, Tracy Barnett, is currently in need of assistance. A couple of weeks ago, their wife was in a car accident. Thankfully, she is okay. but the car was totaled. They do have a loaner car to kind of get around a little bit, but the car seats for their little ones will not fit. So if you have the means, please check out their GoFundMe campaign in the show notes. Any money that they will be raising there will go for a down payment for a vehicle that can transport their whole family. And if they do hit their goal and get over it a bit, they might even be able to get something that will last a bit longer for the whole family. So if you are able to do so, please check out that link and see if you can send anything their way. Even a little bit will help them out. In other news, next month's series only just got recorded yesterday as of the release of this episode. And since Amelia has been pretty sick all this last week, we were able to pull in someone else from the One Shot Network to fill in for her. Agatha Chain from the Asians Represent podcast will be joining me to cover for Amelia. Agatha is a previous guest on the show way back in Series 16, where we covered Hearts of Wulin. She is a phenomenal person, and we are really thrilled she was able to join us for the recording with very, very little advanced notice. So, Agatha, if you're listening, thank you so much. It was truly a joy. If you do like what we're doing here and you want to support our show, you can head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/charactercreationcast and sign up for any of our basic tiers as a free trial and check out all the non-physical rewards at that level for free for 7 days. Each level has a ton of great rewards associated with it. You can go ahead, like one of my favorite tiers is the Sticker of the Month Club at $10. You get a custom sticker every single month that we're able to do that. And if we miss a month, you'll get 2 the next month. And if you join up at right now, we still have some leftovers from all the previous months. So you'll get a whole bunch of stickers that first month signing up right now. At $5 and up, you'll get some custom C3 D6s and a personalized thank you card made by Amelia herself. And at $1 and up, we have our chit chats that we do, or we try to do every single week, that we're able to do them. Once life settles down, we'll see them a lot more regularly at this point. But we're also brainstorming some stuff we can do at the free tier, including maybe even moving the newsletter over there. Once Amelia is no longer sick, her and I will be having a conversation about how we can make that happen. So now is a great time to sign up for our Patreon. We also like to thank all of our patrons personally every episode. And in the spirit of keeping our episodes shorter, we're grouping by 3 now. So let's get started. Thank you, Lieutenant DJG, aka Tigranosaurus, and Eric Bonds. Your support brings us so much joy. Daryl Holiday II, Shadim Cabal, and the Shyest Barbarian you shouldn't have, but we are so glad you did. Benjamin Sweeney, Lorcan McGinnis, and Rob Fletcher, thanks. Kevin Brown, Tentacle Duck, and Cole McCallum, we can't thank you enough, but we will always keep trying. John Adamus, David Chadwick, and Carlos Salazar, thanks for helping us make this show. Eric S., Ian Potmeyer, and Sorigoth, thank you so much. Liam G., Brian Coleman, Garden GM, thank you so much as well. Tanglefoot, Blue Kryptonite, and Danny, we are so grateful for you. Nicole Trainer, Liam Murray, and Kenning, thank you for your continued support. And Brian Kurtz, Marky Fair, and Drew Owens, many thanks to you as well. And thank you to all of our future patrons. Your support is helping keep the lights on for the show, and every bit helps us tremendously. We are incredibly grateful to all of you. If you are already supporting the Patreon or can't afford to do so right now, and still want to show your support for the show, the next best way is to leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Podcast Addict, or even Facebook. If we get your review and we do not have any left on the pile, we will go ahead and read that review on the very next episode right here in the calls to action. So if you get one in right now, It will be at the top of that pile because we currently do not have any new ones. That's all we have for this month's series. Next week, we will have a brand new series with a guest co-host Agatha Chain from the Asians Represent podcast, filling in for Amelia as we learn all about Morkborg. But until then, take care, everyone. Stay safe, drink some water, maybe even some hot tea with honey to soothe your throat from time to time, and keep making those amazing people. We'll see you next time. Character Creation Cast is a production of the One Shot Podcast Network and can be found online at www.charactercreationcast.com. Head to the website to get more information on our hosts, this show, and even our press kit. Character Creation Cast can also be found on Twitter and Blue Sky at CreationCast, or on our Discord server at discord.charactercreationcast.com. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Bolter, and I can be found on Twitter and Blue Sky at Lord Neptune or online at lordneptune.com. Our other host, Amelia Antrim, can be found on Twitter and Blue Sky at Ginger Reckoning. Music for this episode is used with a Creative Commons license or with permission from the podcast they originated from. Further information can be found within the show notes. Our main theme music is Hero Remix by Steve Combs and is used with a Creative Commons license. This podcast is owned by us under Creative Commons. This episode was edited by Ryan Bolter. Further information for the game systems used and today's guests can also be found in the show notes. If you'd like to support our show, find us on Patreon. Get access to bonus episodes, exclusive merch, and much more at patreon.com/charactercreationcast. Thanks for joining us. And remember, we find that the best part of any role-playing game is character creation. So go out there and create some amazing people. We'll see you next time.